I didn't say a word when they handed me the eviction notice. Instead, I calmly slid a copy of the 1923 water rights deed across the table and watched the realization hit them. 35 McMansions were about to become lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could seize my grandfather's land while I was overseas in Afghanistan. These smug bureaucrats built their picture-perfect suburban fantasy on land that never belonged to them, complete with tennis-outfitted Karens cruising around in golf carts like they owned the world. What they didn't realize is that I'm an Army Corps of Engineers officer, and the modest earthen dam sitting quietly on my property had been waiting, patiently, for 45 years for someone foolish enough to build downstream. Their arrogance was something to behold, right up until the moment the spillway gates opened. That's when their luxury neighborhood got its first intimate experience with natural flooding. And trust me, it was going to be immensely satisfying. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness one of the most poetic HOA takedowns ever carried out, brought to you by federal water law, physics, and a little thing called gravity. Let me introduce myself. Jake Morrison. I'm 34 years old, part of the Army Corps of Engineers, and the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, bought this land in 1955, back when Austin was still a quiet college town where barbecue joints outnumbered tech startups by 1,000 to 1. Pops was a man who believed in taking care of the land and the people who lived on it. In 1978, he built a small earthen dam on our property. Nothing elaborate, just smart, solid engineering meant to catch rainwater for the cattle and support our neighbors downstream during dry seasons. The Army Corps even helped him with the design. Pops used to say that one day, the back 40 acres would be worth something special. For the time being, though, it was just a stretch of rolling hills where we ran cattle and where I learned to hunt and respect the land. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan, where I specialized in water management and infrastructure. Building wells and managing flow in a war zone teaches you a lot, like how vital clean water is, and how fast people are willing to fight over it when it runs low. While I was serving my 2nd tour, Pops passed away. The land went into a trust, managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister, Sarah. She lives out in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as I do about surfing. Trying to do the right thing, she hired a local property management company, Lonia Land Services, to handle taxes and upkeep. The property taxes were being paid automatically. But here's the problem, Sarah never actually looked at the tax assessments. And that was a big mistake. Enter our villain, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52 years old, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the kind of woman who treats a white BMW X7 like a badge of honor and considers tennis skirts business casual. Maggie had perfected that brand of southern passive aggression women seem to master by the time they hit their mid-40s, the kind where every insult is delivered with a sweet smile and a tone that somehow makes it feel like they're doing you a favor. She's married to Rick Thornwell, a city councilman, a connection that tells you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's infamous for her neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is really just a polite way of saying she forces out anyone who doesn't match her HGTV version of suburbia. Her designer perfume couldn't quite cover the underlying scent of cigarette smoke and entitlement that followed her around like an invisible entourage. I came home from deployment in August 2023, ready to finally spend some real time on Pop's land. I drove down the old gravel road, past the oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid, expecting to see the same peaceful pastures and that small dam sparkling in the Texas sunlight. Instead, I saw construction crews, concrete trucks, survey stakes littered across my back 40 like an occupying force. It looked like a suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different, harder, meaner. I could taste the dust in the air, and my fury rising with every step as I walked toward the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not even pretending to be apologetic. "We've got permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the cops. Officer Martinez showed up. His discomfort was obvious as he explained that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was deployed. Apparently, if land sits unused for a certain period, and someone else maintains or improves it, they can claim ownership under an old law meant to prevent land from going to waste. Once a rare legal maneuver, It had become a favorite tactic of developers and aggressive HOAs hungry for expansion. And that's when Maggie rolled up, riding in her golf cart like some miniature suburban general surveying her conquest. Her voice was sticky sweet, the kind that made my instincts scream at me to check my wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was handing me a basket of muffins instead of stealing my inheritance. "We're just putting it to good use for the community," she said. But that wasn't what really set me off. What pushed me over the edge was discovering that her construction crews had diverted the small creek feeding Pop's dam. Every day, the water level dropped a little more, taking with it 45 years of careful water management. That dam hadn't just served us, it had helped our neighbors survive droughts, floods, and every unpredictable twist of Texas weather in between. I stood there, watching the water recede, the cracked soil around the dam creeping outward like a wound. And echoing in my ears was Maggie's parting shot, "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was war. I hired the first attorney I could get on the phone. Huge mistake. The guy quoted me $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. And while I'd been overseas serving my country, Maggie's husband, Rick, had snuck an emergency zoning modification through the city council. Overnight, our family's land had been reclassified from agricultural to residential development. Faster than you can say conflict of interest. But here's where my Army Corps training came in handy. While that overpriced lawyer was busy racking up billable hours, I was doing my own reconnaissance, digging through county records like I was hunting for IEDs. And just like back in Afghanistan, I learned that the truth hides in the fine print. That's when I found them, Pop's original dam construction permits from 1978. And they were a thing of beauty. Turns out, Pops hadn't just built that dam with his own two hands. He'd done it in coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed protection. That gave the project federal jurisdiction. And here's something most folks don't know. Once federal involvement exists, local authorities, especially HOAs, lose their power. They can't override it. Not legally. Not ever. I could feel the adrenaline spike as I held those permits. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore, it had just become a federal matter. And then, it got even better. While I was in the courthouse photocopying those documents, I found something else tucked deep in the old records. A water rights deed, dated 1923. My great-grandfather had secured senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. That meant long before the city existed, before the county had its own municipal system, before even one brick of those McMansions was laid, my family had legal control over the water flow. They weren't just trespassing on my land. They were stealing my water. While I was doing all this, Maggie was out front playing the victim card. She called an emergency HOA meeting, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off in advance. I watched the report that evening, saw her standing on her pristine lawn, spewing scripted concern about public safety and dangerous dam structures threatening the children of Willowbrook Estates. All while my family's land, water, and history were being torn apart behind her back. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," Maggie said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue for dramatic effect. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news, they love drama, but they rarely do their homework. If anyone on that crew had bothered to check, they'd have seen that Pop's dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't finished. She took to the Nextdoor app, that digital version of a neighborhood watch, where HOA presidents play queen bee of their suburban kingdoms. Her post warned of aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. In a community that size, everyone knew exactly who she meant. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung thick in the Texas August air. Every evening, I stood on the front porch, watching their construction crews working double shifts, trying to pour as many foundations as they could before I could get a legal injunction in place. Every night, I counted new concrete slabs appearing like scars across the land. Every night, the water in Pop's dam dropped another inch. That's when I called in a favor from Tony Riggs, an old Army buddy now working enforcement at the EPA. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that overpriced attorney ever did. "Jake," he said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation." And since my dam had federal jurisdiction, he didn't even need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what to do. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras lined the perimeter of my land. I took timestamp photos of every piece of equipment, every trench they dug, every pipe laid to redirect water. I measured the creek's flow at 3 different locations: upstream, at the dam, and below the construction site. Everything got logged. That's when Sarah called. She was in California, overwhelmed, anxious, begging me to just take the buyout and walk away. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the sound of gravel crunching under construction boots that had no right being on our land. It was the echo of Maggie's heels clicking across the courthouse floor during zoning hearings that should never have been allowed in the first place. It was the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during late-night research sessions, uncovering just how deep this rabbit hole of backdoor deals and corruption really went. But more than anything, it was about that dam. Pops built it to serve the community, to help during dry seasons, to give back to the land that had raised 3 generations of our family. They didn't just want to bulldoze the earth. They wanted to erase the legacy. For 45 years, that dam had been a source of life for the people living downstream. Now Maggie's crew was turning it into a glorified backyard feature for a row of oversized McMansions. Here's the thing most people don't realize about water rights in Texas. They go back farther than oil rights, farther than mineral claims, and they're a hell of a lot harder to steal. But only if you know how to fight for them. I stood at my kitchen window, watching another concrete truck grind down the gravel road like it belonged there, and a realization hit me. This battle wasn't going to be won in a courtroom, buried under stacks of legal briefs and hourly attorney fees. It was going to be won with engineering. Maggie must have sensed she was losing control, because she escalated. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polos, packed at the entrance to my property like a suburban checkpoint. They took pictures of every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed suspicious activity reports with the sheriff's department like they were deputized mall cops. The harassment campaign was straight out of the playbook. Noise complaints any time I play the radio while working. Citations for unsightly structures on my fully functional, decades-old farmhouse that had stood solid since 1962. Environmental hazard reports about my septic system, even though it had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the lowest blow came courtesy of Rick Thornwell. Using his position on the city council, Rick ordered a wellness check on me through Veteran Services, claiming concern that I might be a troubled veteran having difficulty readjusting to civilian life. A social worker showed up. She was kind and clearly uncomfortable, clipboard in hand, asking standard questions while doing her job. Maggie, of course, watched the whole thing from her golf cart like she was supervising a base inspection. That was just the beginning of their coordinated bureaucratic assault. The building inspector, the fire marshal, the health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day. Like some sort of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found something. Small violations, but just enough to cost time and money. The building inspector, one of Rick's drinking buddies, declared my front porch unsafe and in need of $8,000 in foundation repairs. I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was the same tactic we used in combat zones to pressure local officials, bury them in red tape, drain their resources, wear them down until they surrender. But I'd been trained for that. And 2 can play that game. While they flooded me with inspections and paperwork, I started making calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was more than interested when I told him Maggie's HOA had never filed a wetlands impact assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. And here's something most developers forget. Anytime you alter a natural waterway, even on private land, you need federal environmental clearance. No exceptions. And the fines. They start at $50,000 a day. Every morning, the acrid smell of fresh concrete baking under the summer sun reminded me I was running out of time. But while they pawed sidewalks and drove nails into roofs, my research was building a different kind of foundation, one that Maggie never saw coming. That's when I discovered something big, something that turned this whole mess from personal to criminal. The entire Willowbrook Estates development had been built on land the Army Corps of Engineers classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially refused to provide coverage until the HOA submitted a flood mitigation plan. And their brilliant solution: permanently reroute Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it overflow onto my land instead. Here's your second knowledge nugget. In development, lying about flood risks to secure insurance coverage isn't just unethical, it's a felony. That falls under federal mail fraud. And insurance fraud in real estate development doesn't just bring lawsuits. It brings indictments. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. This wasn't Maggie's first time playing this game. I uncovered records showing her previous HOA in Houston had been slapped with a $2.3 million EPA fine for pulling the exact same stunt, diverting a natural waterway to protect luxury homes. And just before federal prosecutors closed in, Maggie had skipped town and conveniently reappeared here in Austin, where she started fresh with a new HOA and new targets. Meanwhile, she was working hard to destroy my reputation from the inside out. She spread rumors around the neighborhood about my mental health, whispered lies about violent tendencies, and even hired a private investigator to dig into my military background, hoping to find something she could twist into a weapon. She launched a petition calling for the city to condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper, all pearl-clutching and concern. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while Maggie was busy painting herself as the victim, I was quietly building something stronger than a legal case. Alliances. Through online forums for people harassed by HOAs, I connected with others who had been through the same hell. And a disturbing pattern emerged. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties in just the past 3 years. And each time, the same steps played out: pressure, harassment, weaponized bureaucracy, and carefully timed zoning changes that, surprise, always benefited Rick's construction company. I wasn't alone. I teamed up with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Her family garden, once vibrant and overflowing, had withered since the creek diversion dried up her irrigation. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned into oblivion by Rick Thornwell 2 years earlier. He'd lost everything, generations of work wiped away with a single planning commission vote. This wasn't a feud between neighbors. It was a coordinated land grab, and it had been unfolding right under everyone's nose for years. The vibration of heavy machinery shaking my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. Every morning, I stood at the kitchen window, watching concrete trucks roll by like an occupying army. Every evening, I documented the slow, steady theft of water that was killing Pop's Dam. But I wasn't just watching. I was preparing. I installed flow meters at the dam's outlet and at the points where the creek had been diverted. I tracked every drop, calculating the daily theft at 1,200 gallons, adding up to $47,000 a year in stolen agricultural water rights. The gritty feel of sediment between my fingers as I tested the creek bed told a story no lawyer ever could. This wasn't just property damage. This was environmental destruction, quiet, deliberate, and massive in scale. Then came the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my land under eminent domain, for public safety. A hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. And Maggie, she made her intentions clear in the paper. Her quote dripped with self-righteousness. "Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself." That night, I stood by my bedroom window, watching thunderclouds stack up on the horizon. But those weren't just storm clouds. They were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked the eminent domain hearing, 2 weeks out, no time to breathe. And then came the insult. The city offered me $180,000 for land independently assessed at $890,000. The message couldn't be clearer: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local paper ran a hit piece, painting me as an unhinged roadblock to community progress. The headline: Troubled Veteran Blocks Neighborhood Growth. There was a photo that somehow made my farmhouse look like a crack den, and me like a sleep-deprived recluse on the edge. But Maggie's masterpiece was the staged photo op. She had it all planned out. 20 concerned mothers, children in their arms, standing at my property line while a professional photographer captured their fear with my farmhouse looming in the background like some horror movie set. Her Facebook post blew up. #ProtectOurKids. Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, she told the Channel 7 news crew, all polished and professional. Not whatever issues he brought back from war. And you know what? She wasn't wrong about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the ability to recognize psychological warfare when I saw it. I brought back the discipline to stay focused while under pressure. And I brought back the engineering skills to do something about all of it. Then my phone rang. Tony Riggs had found something, and it changed everything. The EPA had already launched a federal investigation into the diversion of Willow Creek, triggered by my initial complaint. But here's the part that really changed the game. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston, the one that racked up that $2.3 million EPA fine. That fine was tied to the exact same scheme she was running here. Federal environmental crimes aren't something you can outrun. They follow you, even when you cross state lines. So while Maggie was busy playing the innocent victim on social media, I was pulling apart the foundation of her entire empire. And I mean that literally. Her HOA's construction loans were secured using inflated property values. The catch? Those values were only valid if the properties had guaranteed water access. Which they didn't. Not anymore. If my family's senior water rights were enforced, and they were legally mine, the whole development would become worthless. Financially underwater. The irony hit hard. They stole my water to increase their land value, and now their greed was going to sink them. Maggie's panic started to show. She offered me $400,000 in cash, no questions asked, if I accepted within 48 hours. I didn't even flinch. When that didn't work, she flew to California and tried to manipulate my sister. She showed up on Sarah's doorstep in tennis gear, spinning some sob story about her troubled veteran brother. That move backfired spectacularly. Sarah might not know Texas water law, but she knows me. She called, laughing so hard she could barely get the words out. Jake, some lunatic in a tennis skirt just showed up saying she wanted to help you get professional support. I told her if she ever contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI. While Maggie was busy making enemies, I kept building allies. I partnered with Amanda Cross, an environmental attorney who specializes in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition of downstream farmers whose livelihoods had been disrupted by the diverted creek. Miguel Santos came forward with records showing his family had used the creek's water for agriculture since 1887. Mrs. Chen brought out black and white photos of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, lush and thriving, thanks to the same water source that now flowed into Maggie's man-made ponds. Even the local chapter of the Audubon Society got involved when they discovered the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting grounds for several federally protected bird species. Turns out, illegally diverting water and wiping out protected wildlife tends to get Washington's attention real fast. During one of my late-night patrols, old Army habits die hard, I made a discovery that nearly brought tears to my eyes. Pop's Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork. The 1978 plans included a full emergency spillway system with underground hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. I ran midnight tests, and the hollow echo of water through those spillway tunnels told me everything I needed to know. The system still worked. It had been designed for exactly this type of scenario, controlled flooding to restore the creek's natural flow. I did the math. To return Willow Creek to its original course, I'd need to release 2.8 million gallons. Pop's Dam was holding 3.1 million, thanks to a summer full of rain. The numbers lined up. The timing had to be perfect. Using my drone, I mapped out the entire new development, every house foundation, every man-made creek bed, every drain. 5 of those homes were built directly in the historical floodplain. 3 had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the kicker. Maggie's construction crews had installed decorative creek beds made of concrete and ornamental rocks. They looked good on a brochure but were never built to handle a real waterway. Meanwhile, Pop's spillway system had been engineered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, designed not for decoration, but for flood mitigation. Then Maggie made her biggest mistake yet. Her crew began pouring permanent concrete barriers to block the original creek bed, an irreversible move that would not only destroy the downstream ecosystem but also render my spillway system useless. It was a final straw, and the perfect justification. Heavy rains were in the forecast for September, just enough to cover a controlled flood under the guise of emergency dam maintenance. I stood at the spillway control tower at sunset, holding Pop's old leather-bound journal in my hands, reading an entry he'd written in 1979. We built this to help the land, not fight it. When water needs to move, you let it move. The land remembers. I looked up at the sky, at the clouds stacking high and dark across the horizon, and knew what I had to do. It was time to open the gates. Then, in the courthouse archives, dust thick on my clothes, eyes burning from hours of searching, I found it. Buried behind a stack of old tax records was a misfiled document from 1979, the original agricultural flood management covenant tied to Pop's dam. And the language? It was simple. Beautifully so. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding, it was a legal obligation that overrode any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Amanda Cross's investigation revealed something even more damning. The HOA's insurance applications contained outright falsehoods. They claimed no risk of seasonal flooding and asserted that the permanent creek diversion had been approved by all relevant agencies to secure $47 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud, and it carries mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the entire scheme unraveled. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development, he was the primary investor. Every home built on my stolen land funneled money directly into his pockets. And here's the kicker. He never once recused himself from a city council vote that benefited his project. Tony Riggs shared EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had wiped out the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill, but somehow, the report mysteriously disappeared from Rick's office before it could spark federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water, they were destroying an entire ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans had been secured by fraudulent environmental assessments claiming the creek diversion was a temporary construction measure. Banks were told the water would be restored to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to me, the entire development would be in violation of federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in construction loans. That's when I found Pop's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1980 entry broke my heart. Open spillway today, helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through a dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about my family's profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water. It was 45 years of community cooperation my grandfather had built, one neighbor at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and my spillway system was the only way to safely manage seasonal flooding. The pressure of the timeline was crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. But if I acted now, I could control the timing and intensity. A controlled spillway release would demonstrate natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while proving that the HOA development violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Pop's journal in my hands, the moral clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order that had sustained this community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed the local farming community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden withered without creek water. 3 other families were forced to sell generational properties to Rick's eminent domain schemes. But federal environmental investigators were scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid and the dam's control mechanisms reminded me this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to honor Pop's legacy and open those gates. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation, with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention the moment the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, offering historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area and brought the credibility of the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. If I could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid and the dam's control mechanisms reminded me this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to honor Pop's legacy and open those gates. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation, with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention the moment the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, offering historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area and brought the credibility of the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having ironclad paperwork that predates any development claims. My technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering. I created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations. Controlled release starting at 6 a.m. Gradual increase over 4 hours. Peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns without causing structural damage, except to Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was paramount. I posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't some reckless flood, it was a carefully controlled demonstration of how water naturally wanted to flow. Amanda reached out to environmental reporters at the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Miguel arranged for community members to witness the agricultural water restoration firsthand. The strategy was simple: control the narrative before Maggie could spin it as dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chen monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip network. Never underestimate little old ladies with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who happened to be Miguel's cousin, reported on city council closed-door meetings. My army buddy at Fort Hood provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While I rebuilt the spillway controls with modern hydraulic systems, Amanda waged financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about Rick's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing coordination. The Weather Service confirmed heavy rains arriving in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled the federal environmental inspection for the same week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. But I knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured. So I prepared for her predictable responses, emergency HOA meetings, media smear campaigns, and probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. Evidence preservation was crucial. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing the original creek bed and seasonal flooding patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with a volunteer fire department, communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan, one we wouldn't need, but it was there to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Amanda's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General with evidence of insurance fraud, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlements faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as I serviced all dam equipment and tested the spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radios. As I stood at those controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, everything felt aligned. The weather forecast confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators were scheduled to arrive in 36. Maggie was booked for her morning show appearance in 24 hours, probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice, and 45 years of stolen water back to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation hit new levels when she hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't your average rent-a cops with flashlights. These were tactical gear wannabes, guys who work private military contracts and think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed trying to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was caught on video attempting to jam quickset concrete into the hydraulic lines while his buddy kept lookout. Tony Riggs tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual, but it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quickset concrete at 2 a.m. Maggie's media blitz grew even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling, politician's victim voice. "Veterans need mental health support, not weapons," she told the host, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick's expert testimony as a city engineer hammered on catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. While Maggie played victim on television, my surveillance training was paying off. I documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every piece of evidence that would later prove criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone as part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were far more desperate than I'd realized. The legal assault came next. Rick fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the next morning, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy who'd received $15,000 in campaign contributions from Rick's construction company, agreed to hear the emergency public safety motion. Amanda uncovered the corruption link and immediately filed for Walsh's recusal. But we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie rallied a neighborhood safety patrol to physically surround my property. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and Protect Our Kids signs, planning to livestream the spillway opening as environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for Maggie's narrative: suburban families with children versus a dangerous veteran wielding a dam. But Miguel Santos wasn't standing down. He brought 30 farmers and families to back our agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen organized a counter-demonstration, showcasing historical photos of the creek in its natural state. Amanda secured attendance from Audubon Society and Sierra Club representatives. Two competing narratives were about to collide: veteran attacks families versus community protects water rights. Then the sabotage escalated. Security footage showed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, a deliberate blockage designed to cause catastrophic flooding if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the blockage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury as I realized how far they were willing to go. Rick wielded his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dam. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left, privately warned me, "Jake, you got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene. Make it count." At the perfect moment, Amanda's fraud reports triggered a state investigation. The Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without coverage, construction stopped immediately. Financial pressure hit Maggie and Rick where it hurt most: their wallets. Tony moved the EPA inspection up 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were en route, scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become undeniable federal evidence of lawful water management. But Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest yet. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, claiming I'd made suicide threats and needed to be placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold. At 5:30 a.m., just as I was gearing up for the spillway operation, the VA social worker showed up at the farmhouse. I had to convince her I was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning conversation. Sarah called from California, her voice cracking with worry. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jake. This isn't what Pops would want." For a moment, I almost cracked. Then I found Pops' final journal entry about standing up to bullies. My resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes, you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky a deep orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was magnificent, not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek, cupping the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully rehearsed morning show calm cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim responded calmly, "This gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons." Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the segment. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked, desperate to spin the story. The reporter, clearly caught off guard, asked, "The water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Maggie's narrative collapse live on air. Meanwhile, Rick was frantically calling Judge Walsh, screaming into the phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in property value," he yelled, apparently forgetting Amanda was recording the conversation right there on the courthouse steps. Here's a legal nugget. Texas is a one-party consent state, meaning you only need one person's permission to record a phone call, and that person can be yourself. The engineering validation was a thing of beauty. EPA agent Kim measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Tony Riggs documented everything. This was how Willow Creek flowed naturally before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies prioritized natural water flow over development convenience, and we were proving that principle in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system sprang to life for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream farms reported restored water access to their stock ponds. The local diner owner brought coffee and homemade kolaches to everyone, saying, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." Even some of Maggie's supporters quietly drifted away, realizing no homes were actually flooded. Turns out, it's hard to sustain righteous indignation when the disaster you're protesting is just water flowing exactly where it belongs. The insurance collapse accelerated when state investigators slapped the construction company with a cease and desist order. All work on the HOA development halted pending a full fraud investigation. Maggie discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent water access claims. The financial house of cards was crumbling faster than a dam made of playing cards. But Maggie wasn't done fighting. She called Rick in a panic. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Rick, apparently having learned nothing from his security team's arrest, sent 3 concrete trucks to accidentally spill their loads across the creek bed. Federal agents immediately arrested the truck drivers for interfering with a federal environmental investigation. Turns out, interfering with federal environmental enforcement isn't a civil matter, it's a felony. The technical success was everything I'd calculated. The water flow stabilized at optimal levels for agricultural and environmental needs. No flooding in residential areas. The creek stayed within its natural banks, exactly as 45 years of seasonal patterns had proven it would. My Army Corps engineering had been flawless. The political fallout was swift. City Councilman Martinez showed up and publicly demanded Rick's immediate resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock," he told the media. "You're done." Federal investigators expanded their probe, adding RICO charges for systematic land fraud. Tony told me later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for criminal prosecution." But the sweetest moment came when Maggie realized her $2.3 million investment was now worthless without fraudulent water access. She screamed at me across the creek, "You've destroyed everything. 35 families." I responded, calm, measured, loud enough for every camera to catch. "No. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else." Maggie stormed off, threatening federal lawsuits that never materialized. As Miguel's extended family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Chen brought out a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek, I realized something important. This was never about revenge. It was about community. The kind Pops had built, one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. The media narrative shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The original Veteran Floods neighborhood story transformed into community reclaimed stolen water. Sometimes, the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat. Overflow crowds watched through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a 3-piece army of high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of concerned community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Amanda, wearing a simple button-down shirt, and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes, the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery was divided like a wedding gone wrong. HOA supporters on the left, clutching their Protect Our Kids signs, the farming community on the right, weathered hands and determined faces. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $2.7 million in flood damage caused by my spillway operation. They wheeled in a psychiatrist who'd never met me but was more than happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based solely on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, until Amanda stood for our response. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant that legally required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Kim took the stand and testified that my spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any actual property damage. Historical photographs prove current water levels matched 60 years of natural seasonal patterns. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Legal water rights documentation always trumps recent development claims, especially when federal environmental agencies back your position. Then Tony Riggs took the stand as EPA enforcement officer. His testimony was devastating. The HOA development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh squirmed in his seat as federal crimes were detailed right in his courtroom. You could see him calculating whether his political loyalty to Rick was worth risking federal prosecution for obstruction of justice. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick as a witness. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction company. When Amanda played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, Rick exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words, captured on audio, proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor could. But the real emotional power came from the community testimony. Miguel Santos described 3 generations of farming destroyed by the creek diversion, his voice breaking as he spoke of his grandfather's dreams dying with the stolen water. Mrs. Chen showed photographs of her family garden, lush and green before the diversion, brown and withered after. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any legal argument. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations. Downstream property owners confirmed their agricultural water access had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what became her final performance. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she said, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He's taking revenge on innocent families using psychological warfare against children." She claimed I'd threatened her safety and described the spillway operation as environmental terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. When Amanda called me to testify, the courtroom fell silent. I presented Pop's journals documenting 40 years of community water sharing, explained my Army Corps engineering calculations, and spoke directly to Judge Walsh. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family and this community for 45 years. The MIC drop moment came when Amanda presented the final evidence, documentation showing Maggie's Houston HOA had paid $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor stood and announced a criminal investigation into an interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as the full scope of corruption became clear. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled that my spillway operation was legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease all interference with federal environmental investigations. His warning to Rick was pointed and firm. This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement. As federal agents escorted Rick from the courthouse and banking investigators served additional warrants, Maggie found herself surrounded by reporters with nowhere to hide. She refused all comment and sped away in her BMW, probably already calling moving companies. I emerged to cheering crowds of farmers, environmentalists, and curious townspeople who'd witnessed justice flowing as naturally as water finding its way home. Amanda announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference, while Miguel thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My statement was simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Rick Thornwell pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and was banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely, and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. My property value restored to $1.2 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development ever could be. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation went to a good cause. I bought Miguel's family farm at tax auction and returned it to him debt-free. Environmental restoration often increases property values more than development ever could. The community transformation was the real victory. The restored creek now attracts ecotourism, kayaking, birdwatching, and fishing where McMansions was supposed to stand. Mrs. Chen's garden became a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture. 3 downstream farms reported their best crop yields in a decade. The local diner became the unofficial headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists planned the next fight against corporate water theft. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected Guadalupe populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 4 months. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek as a critical wildlife corridor, ensuring permanent protection. My spillway operation became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job correctly. Personally, I found a piece I didn't know I was missing. I renovated Pop's farmhouse using sustainable construction techniques, and Sarah moved back from California to help manage our growing agritourism business. Amanda and I, well, let's just say fighting environmental crime together creates a pretty strong bond. The ripple effects spread across Texas like water finding new channels. Environmental groups now use the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversion statewide. Federal agencies cite our case in new water rights enforcement guidelines. I've become an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and the phone rings constantly. We established the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Miguel's daughter, Maria, was the first recipient, now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin. She wants to protect watersheds across Texas from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival celebrates restoration and community resilience with local food, environmental education, and veteran support services. We raised money for a water rights legal defense fund that has already helped 6 other communities fight back against corporate theft. My favorite part: kids swimming in the creek where homes were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows free because a community stood together. Every Sunday, I visit Pop's grave and bring creek water in a mason jar, just like he used to do when he checked the flow after heavy rains. "Thanks, Pops," I tell him. "The creek's singing again, just like you said it would." The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now owns development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent buffer zone that prevents future commercial development. No one will ever steal this water again. But here's the beautiful twist: Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution based on our case. 147 families across 3 states filed similar water rights restoration lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight became a movement for environmental justice nationwide. From my porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded. Some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes, you have to flood the valley to save the creek. But you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt city council connections. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything. Find allies. And remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting the land for future generations. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one and reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back against corruption and winning. And remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek matters, too. Next week, I'm telling you about the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm, so she cut power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That's a story about a different kind of power and how one engineer turned the lights out on municipal corruption. Water finds a way. Justice finds a way. And communities that fight together win together. Willow Creek flows free, y'all. And it always will.